I'm going to review two books about the Hungarian Revolution. These two books I have used for my own research for my book about the Hungarian Revolution and my grandfather's escape following. So first of all, James Michener wrote The Bridge at Andau, and I will talk about that first. And this one was paramount to my research, and I highly, highly recommend it. I'll review it next. It is 12 Days by Victor Sebastian. So, James Michener, The Bridge at Andau. First of all, the picture of this bridge here is not the bridge. That's not what it is. It was a tiny raised footpath, basically, over a canal, like a man-made little river, and it wasn't even at Andau, but that was just the colloquial name for it. It wasn't in Andau. It was in Hungary entirely, and there were still a few hundred yards until you got to Austria, and then within Austria, a couple miles away from the border, was the village of Andau, but this was the closest thing to the village. Appointment reminder. So that's why it's called The Bridge at Andau. So James Michener was a novelist, and he was actually in Austria at the time of the revolution and welcoming refugees across. He wrote different books about places. Some of them were titled like Mexico. So he is a novelist. However, this was a work of nonfiction, but some people are classifying it as fiction. They classify it as a novelist because he made up names and conflated some of the characters, because otherwise there would be way too many characters, way too many people in the book. So he took the actions that several people did and put it into one character under a made-up name. He made names up and changed people's names, except for a few of them who didn't want their name changed. He interviewed people, and it was directly after the revolution. So the revolution ended in November of 1956, and this was published at the end of January 1957. He wrote this within 2 months, and he didn't want, well, the people who he interviewed didn't want their real names out there because they left behind family in Hungary when they escaped into Austria where he interviewed them. And if their names got out there, then the AVH, the secret police, and the Soviets would likely kill and torture their family. Well, not in that order, but you know what I mean. So because he made some composite characters and he changed names, people classify it as fiction, but it's really not. Some works of nonfiction are fictionalized and people take liberties with them, like with the book, this is a tangent, The Tattooist of Auschwitz. When I read that book, I noticed that there were certain errors. Like, she said that a train went from one place directly to Auschwitz, like without any pit stops, and that wasn't possible because I knew there was no train station at the place that she said it from, or it couldn't have made, they had to make connections or whatever. And I noticed that that was wrong because the Holocaust is my thing. It's what I was researching for years. And then she came out with some interviews and she was like, yeah, I took some liberties to make these parts up because the person that the story is about, the tattooist of Auschwitz, did not remember these things or whatever. And so that happens with nonfiction, and sometimes people want to bastardize that and then say, that means it's a novel, it's not real, but it is. However, as I said, we do have to take it with a grain of salt because this book was published before making a bibliography was common practice for these things, and he was a novelist. He did write a few works of fiction, but this was, I think, his first nonfiction book, and he didn't put any sources. This is just the end. That's the end of the book. There's no sources, there's no bibliography, there's no citations for anything. He didn't even list the days that he interviewed people. He just said, I interviewed these people and these are their stories. There are certain things in here that I have been able to verify through other sources, and there are some things that I have not been able to verify, but seem not too outrageous that it wouldn't be believed. One of those instances is a train conductor who, after the revolution, was taking a bunch of sealed boxcars to Russia. And so he had this train, and he got to Russia and then thought, you know what, there's probably people in these boxcars, because the Russians, the Soviets, would deport Hungarians, and especially they deported the freedom fighters and the people who they thought were, revolutionaries, or what they called counter-revolutionaries, which I'll make a whole different video about because that's a different thing. But he turned the train around with a bunch of allegedly freedom fighters inside the boxcars, and then he took the train back through Hungary, got to the border of Austria, stopped the train, and let everybody off. And he put a sign on the outside of the train that said delivery from Russia or something, so that nobody would question it as he was coming through, and that the train track operators wouldn't stop him or anything. But that was like a rumor that spread. I haven't been able to verify it, but he wrote in here that a lot of people verified that they had heard the rumor or they were part of that train, and that it was like the laughing stock of the, you know, like to laugh at the Russians. But anyways, there are certain things like that that I haven't been able to verify, but there are other things that seem relatively not outrageous, so pretty believable. There's a lot of things in here that are really heartbreaking. There was an instance where a priest was watching a battle that was ensuing between the Soviets that were just beating the fuck out of the freedom fighters, and he watched a boy like no older than 12, because there were a lot of kids that were freedom fighters. There were so many kids just picking up grenades, strapping the grenades to their body, and then running out in front of a line of Russian tanks and sacrificing themselves so that the people further along would have more time to get ready to prepare for all of those tanks coming. So a priest witnessed a small boy just go out as like a suicide bomber, basically. And there are things like that that just kind of escaped history. They were never written down, or they weren't witnessed, or people didn't know the names of those people. So a lot of it is just first person narrative. I saw this happen, and we've got to take it with a grain of salt, but we also need to believe it when people say this is what happened. So tens of thousands of people crossed the bridge at Andau, and 180,000 total went into Austria. The Russians realized that people were crossing with this bridge, so they blew it up. And reportedly, a bunch of college students went to fix the bridge as much as they could so that people could continue crossing. Because the Austrians were there at the border every night. They had like a rolling patrol, basically, of civilians and police and military waiting for people to cross because they knew refugees were coming over. So they would kind of be, and the author was there. He would be on the Austrian side, kind of beaconing people to come to them, because in the middle of the night you can get really lost when the border looks like this. So they welcomed people over and then took them to refugee camps and processing centers. And anyways, I highly recommend this book. If you don't want to believe, if you don't want to suspend the idea that, well, I can't verify this, so there it's not true, then, I mean, don't be like that, but I do recommend this. And now, Victor Sebastian's 12 Days. This has been paramount to my research. I have kind of ruined the book. I've dog-eared a lot of pages and some of them got wet, but this man put in so much research to this book. He lists every single source. The bibliography is huge. I have found so many sources through this book that I've been able to go to, like declassified CIA documents, the government, you know, when the government has meetings and then they talk to each other and they have notes from the meetings and the minutes from some of the meetings that our government in the USA had, where they discussed how having a Hungarian Revolution and people over there, you know, suffering from communism would benefit the US. Therefore, they were going to let it play out. They weren't going to intervene, even though Hungary asked them for help. And then there were rumors that the US government would intervene, and the rumors spread in Budapest, but we didn't actually intervene because we thought that an uprising in a communist country would therefore help the US and the propaganda that we were putting out to say communism was bad. And it was. However, the Red Scare was really inflated, even though communism was bad. And we'll talk about how communism is basically the same as fascism in another video. I haven't been as controversial as I could be, so let's do that later. But anyways, a bunch of documents, a bunch of like weird things, like there's this whole series of the Jewish yearbook of people, like Jewish people immigrating places. And there were like tens of thousands of, I don't know why I picked the book up, Jewish immigrants after the Hungarian Revolution. So tens of thousands of Jewish Hungarians. And I think it was something like 20% of all Hungary's Jews left in the revolution, 2% of the whole country. 200,000 people was 2% of the country of 10 million people, a little bit less than 10 million. But 20% of the Jewish people left Hungary. And there was a lot of information about the percentages and like how many people and where all the people went from this Jewish yearbook thing that I found online. So if you're looking for a heavily researched book, this is it. And it basically gives a play-by-play, a rundown of every single day. And I love when books have maps. I want to put maps in my book, but I don't really know which maps I am able to use, like without royalties. I don't know. But he gives, it's like day by day. This is prologue, Sunday, the 4th of 1956. But then in the prelude, it begins 15 October 1949. And with every chapter, it is the date and the location, because it switches back and forth between like this was happening in Budapest, or this was happening in America, or this was happening in Poznan, Poland. So it gives like a play-by-play each day. There's a lot of photos. I guess that guy kind of looks like he's doing a Heil from there. But it's fantastic. This is such a good book, and I highly recommend it. And here's just a little poll. Put it in the comments. Do you read the before matter of the book, especially if it's a nonfiction book? This part in particular, like you look at the maps and you look at the acknowledgments and these things. I don't read the copyright page. Who the fuck does that? But this, the main actors, these are the people who played a large role in the revolution. And I read these, and I want to know how to pronounce names if they're going to be in the book over and over again. And Hungarian names are fucking hard. So I've put this in my book, and I have the people, the name, how to pronounce it, and a little bit about the people, so that when you come across the person in the book and then you flip back to the beginning and be like, who is he? What role did he play again? I read this. I love this. Do you guys read it, or do you skip over it? Also, are you the anal retentive type, the type A like I am, where the first page that you open up to in a book is the table of contents? This is the first place I go. If I am opening a nonfiction book, I go to the table of contents. Those people who open up a book to just say page 100, that was lucky, and then just read in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of a whole chapter, and that's not how you like identify whether or not you want to read a nonfiction book, I think. Like, I go to the table of contents first, and then I go to the writing. Do I like the writing style? And sometimes I'll do that. I'll go to a middle of a page somewhere and just read the writing style, but after I've read the table of contents, you know? And for a novel, which I rarely read, I will just flip to the middle, because there's never usually a table of contents, and if it is, it's just chapter titles. But for a novel, I'll do that. But nonfiction, I want to know the acknowledgments. I want to know your sources, your bibliography, your maps, the main actors, the introduction, the appendix, the source. I want to know all that. So what do you do? What do you do when you do that?